Hi Ross, thank you for agreeing to take part in the Respect Project's local sporting hero interview. To start off our interview, could you tell me about where you grew up and what your childhood was like?
Surely. Well, firstly, Jack, thanks very much for inviting me. Great pleasure to be here with you. I grew up in a small village called Hilltown, which is about 12 miles from Newry, towards the Mourne Mountains. I grew up in a family of 4 kids, my mother and father. I had 2 sisters and a brother, of which I'm the eldest. We would have been in a farming community at home, so there was plenty of green spaces and very few houses. That has changed very much over the past 40 or 50 years, so it's now quite built up and it's probably a small town now.
What sports did you play as a child and what teams did you play for?
When I was younger in Hilltown, there was only really Gaelic sports available. So it was Gaelic football. I played a little bit of hurling, but I loved soccer. Played as much soccer in the schoolyard as we played Gaelic football. So things were very, very simple when I was growing up, and I would say I had a great time growing up playing all sorts of games.
Who were your sporting heroes growing up and why?
Where I come from was mostly a Gaelic tradition. Down in the 1960s had won a number of All-Irelands, and a few of the players on that team lived close to me. So the likes of Kevin Musson and Patsy O'Hagan, who were from my club at home, were obviously big heroes. Then in the late 60s they won it again, and there was a player called Colin McIllarney, and he was like, for me, he was like what the Messi or Ronaldo is today. He was just brilliant, and he was really, really a big favourite of mine, as were other players. Sean O'Neill, who was from Newry. And as I got a wee bit older, there was a great team came along in Gaelic football called Carr, and they had a couple of players, namely Jack O'Shea, Mikey Sheehy, those fellas, and they were huge heroes also.
Could you tell me about your first involvement with the Down County team and what it was like making your debut?
Yeah, I first played for Down as a minor. Played on a Down minor team that was beaten in an Ulster final. It's actually a fella called Donald Durkin from Newry here who captained the team. He was a wonderful footballer, and it was a very, very proud moment for me and my family and for the club, and pretty nerve-wracking. But it was, I always felt that that's what I wanted to do, and once I started to play with the Down minors, then it was a matter of probably knuckling down and seeing how good I could become.
You went on to win 2 All-Ireland titles with Down in the early 90s. Could you tell me more about this and what your memories are of these?
It was an incredible time for the whole of the county. Down hadn't been successful for 30 years, almost 30 years, and the team that I played on just came along, and nearly it was like a whirlwind of enthusiasm and support and joy for a couple of years. We played some of our matches. The first match we played in Newry, and it was a pretty poor game, and after that things just seemed to get better, and it culminated with us winning the All-Ireland final in 1991 against Meath. After 1991 we had a couple of poor years, poor in results, but the 2 teams that beat us went on to win All-Irelands, so if you look back we weren't that far away either. And then in 1994 again we won it again, and it was just tremendous. The coming back into Newry with 40, 50, 60,000 people waiting for us was an incredible feeling, and one that made everybody in the county very, very happy.
What do you think made those 2 teams so successful?
That's a brilliant question. We had a great management team. So we had a man called Pete McGrath was our manager, and helping him was a man called John Murphy from Newry here. And John Murphy had won an All-Ireland medal with Down in the 1968. So Pete had managed a number of successful underage teams with his school, St Coleman's, also from Newry, and then Down Minors. On top of that, we had an incredible group of players, very, very strong-willed, probably hard to manage at the best of times. The mix was just really, really good. Plus the fact is we had some wonderful players. And I would say if there was one thing that made that group stick together was the commitment. They were incredibly committed to working hard, and they were incredibly honest with one another. So if somebody was slacking off or weren't afraid to maybe tell them, it's not good enough and you've got to do better. So I would say those characteristics, their commitment and their honesty, lay the foundations for the two winning teams.
Who was the best player you played against and why?
I played in a few different positions. So I played as a halfback, I played as a midfielder, and I played as a half forward. So I came up against different types of players. As a defender, there was a fella from Dublin called Vinnie Murphy, who I played against. He was a wee bit younger than me, and I had heard nothing about him. And we played Dublin in a National League game in Croke Park in, I think it was 1987 or 1988. And we were beaten 21 points to 4. And I was marking Vinnie Murphy and he scored 6 points. So I'll never forget that day. I played in midfield and I played against a man who I mentioned earlier, Jack O'Shea. And he played for Kerry and he was just one of the greatest footballers ever. So I would say Jack O'Shea probably is the most complete all-round footballer I played against. But the likes of Vinnie Murphy, and there's a guy who played for Dublin called Mick Deegan, was also a really, really good footballer. But everybody poses different challenges on each day you go out, so you just need to be ready and on your game every day you go out. Who
was the best player you played with and why?
Well, there are a couple of players who stand out on those Down teams that were, in my opinion, exceptional. Why they're so good is they're still talked about today, and that's over 30 years later. So Mickey Linden, who was a forward, James McCartan, who was a forward, and Greg Blaney, who was a forward, they would get a lot of my votes for being the best players. A really, really top class player, and he probably doesn't get the credit he deserves, but he was one of those players that could play in any position, was a guy called Gary Mason. And then the best fullback I've seen playing football is a lad called Conor Deegans. So I don't want to name them all, but I have to name those 5 more than anybody else.
At what age did you finish your playing career, and did you find it a difficult decision? Well,
I finished playing for Down when I was 36, and then I played for my club for another 4 or 5 years, so I finished playing for Clonduff, I think it was about 42 or 43. I didn't find either difficult. When I finished playing for Down, I was 36 and I should have finished the year before. I finished in 2000, but the year before in 1999, Down were playing Armagh in an Ulster final and we got an awful hammering. And I shouldn't have played that year, but I didn't want to finish on a bad year. So I went back in 2000 and then I got sent off. So I didn't be playing for Down in 2000. So I said, well, it had started off bad in 99, it's got worse in 2000, I better quit now. I just knew my body wasn't up to it, so I had no problem in retiring. There were a number of good players coming through and I had enjoyed every single minute of it, and I had very, very few regrets. And then I went back and I played with Clonduff, my club, and I sort of was re-enthused when I went back. I had a couple of years where Clonduff were quite successful. Up until 2000, I hadn't won anything with Clonduff, so I started off playing for Clonduff seniors when I was 16, and I got to 2000 when I was 36 and I hadn't won anything, and then 2000 we won the championship and we won the league, which was massive for our community at home. And then I had a son who started to play football with Clonduff, and he made his senior debut in, I think, 2003, and I wanted to play one game with him. So in 2003, I said that was enough and hung the boots up, but no regrets.
You've managed a number of club and county teams. How did you find the transformation from playing into management?
I hadn't planned to go into coaching. It happened by accident. In saying that, when I was growing up at home, everybody just gave a hand out coaching different underage teams and that, but that was just done. There was no thought process to go into coaching. The first coaching job I got was with a club called Newry Mitchells, and it was a wonderful experience. I had an absolute fun-filled couple of years with the Mitchells, and as a result of that, then I got involved with coaching county minors, and that led on to county seniors. It was difficult because what I had to juggle with was that I thought all players thought like me. Now, thank God they didn't, or it would have been a disaster. But I had to understand that maybe football wasn't the most important thing for everybody. Coming to the Mitchells, where I come from in Clonduff, football takes precedent, and it comes before everything. But fellas worked at weekends in Newry, worked in retail, and it was to understand that mentality. They weren't any less committed. As a matter of fact, some of the best fellas that I coached were from Newry Mitchells. Definitely the most enjoyable experience I had was Newry Mitchells. The county was different because it was more of an elite setup, and it was hard to get everybody singing off the one page. Down weren't used to winning when I took them over, and it was trying to get them to be confident in their own ability, but understand that they had to work hard. The senior, it wasn't successful. We didn't win anything. The county minor team that I managed and the county senior team that I managed, we weren't that successful, but it was enjoyable because it gave me probably better skills to understand how others think, and it was good then for dealing with people in different circumstances. But I'm delighted I went into it. It kept me involved in Gaelic sport, and to which I'm still involved today.
What would you regard as your highest and lowest points in your sporting career, and why?
The highest ones would obviously be winning with Down in 91 and 94 and winning with Clonduff in 2000. The joy, it's hard to put into words the joy that we experienced. The worst feeling or the low point would definitely be getting sent off. I get sent off for Down once, and I get sent off for Clonduff in big games, and they would be big regrets to this day.
What was the most important lesson you've learned through your sporting journey?
Wow, that's a brilliant question. given that Gaelic football is a team sport, I would say the greatest lesson it has taught me is that everything you do has a knock-on effect on someone else. So that if I prepare poorly, or my attitude's poor, or I'm disrespectful to my teammates or to the management, that has a knock-on effect on the team, and that can affect the team's performance. So I would say it has taught me that I need to do my best at all stages because so many other people depend on it.
Who would you say was the biggest influence in your sporting career and why?
I've come across a number of people who at different stages in my career have left a mark and made an incredible influence. So I had a teacher growing up at primary school, a man called Sean O'Neill, not the great Sean O'Neill, the footballer, but he was brilliant because he had us playing football in rain, in snow, in hail, in wind. It didn't matter what the weather was. We went out to play football and it was always fun with him. As I got a wee bit older, then I came across a couple of coaches. There's a man called Sean Smith who brought me onto the Down senior team when I first played for Down. Obviously Pete McGrath and John Murphy with Down. But the biggest influence were probably my mother and father and wider family, because they both came from very strong GAA traditions and they gave me my love for it and probably kept me on the straight and narrow, told me what was needed and what was expected of me. So I'd say while there were many individuals, my mother and father probably were the biggest influence.
What was the best advice you were ever given?
I was going through maybe a bit of a rocky patch in my career, playing for Down. Maybe wasn't the most committed at a period in time, and one of the other players came to me and said, if you are not committed to the group, then leave the panel, because we don't want any bad eggs on this squad. And I remember going home and having a really good think to myself and saying, I better sharpen up, because it's not about me, it's about the group. So that is the best bit of advice I got, and that came from a fella I mentioned earlier, Greg Blaney, who was probably the best Down footballer I've played with.
How different is Gaelic football now when you played?
It's quite different. It's a lot more science-based. There's a lot more analysis. There is a lot more. There's a lot less risk taken, which means that it's more of a possession-based game than when I played. Because when I played, it was a matter of, as soon as you get the ball, you have to get it forward into the opposition goal area. It probably wasn't as pleasing to the eye for some as the football is today. But I do believe that if the players in my era were given the opportunity to play in today's era with the same facilities, I think they would be every bit as good as the players today.
Have you any future aspirations in sport?
Well, currently I'm involved in the committee in my club at home in Clonduff, and we haven't been successful for a very long time. So over the next couple of years, I want to put in place some processes and an environment in which our young players, boys and girls, can become as good as they can become, whether that be through coaching or athletic development. We're way behind other clubs in that. So that would be my goal. It would be, if in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time Clonduff are successful and I've helped, that would be probably my greatest achievement.
To finish off our interview and to maybe help other young people interested in playing Gaelic football for their county, what advice would you give them?
Firstly, you have to enjoy it, because if you don't enjoy it, it will become a chore and then you'll get fed up with it. You have to understand that it won't always be good. There'll be some poor times, some disappointment, a lot of disappointment before there's any good times, and you might not experience any good times. But what I would say is that for me, playing Gaelic sports is the greatest experience any young person can have. They will make so many friends. They will travel all over the country, and by playing Gaelic games you will develop personal skill sets, so you will learn to respect others, you will learn to commit to a group, you will learn to improve as the years go on, and these skill sets then you can take off a sporting field and apply to any environment you get into.
Thank you, Ross, for allowing me this opportunity to learn more about you and your sporting career.
Thank you so much, Jack. Lovely. Thank you.